From US presidential elections to the race to be the UK's next leader, social media adverts specifically tailored to the user have become vital for winning over support. But if we're all seeing different versions of these adverts, what is that doing to democracy? Welcome to Roundtable. Very good to have you along. I'm David Foster. Politicians, well, they've long known the power of a good advert. Now we get them tailored specifically to our own views, carefully created to persuade us, it's hoped, based on our age, our gender, and what we like or don't like.
Politics have become personal. Political adverts are now tailored to each voter based on what makes them click. Personalised ads work through algorithms, a set of rules designed to produce a result. Algorithms are based on past behaviour, and on social media they are designed to draw you in and keep you there. Personalised ads were widely used in the Brexit referendum and the 2016 US presidential campaign, although it's hard to say how influential they were on how people voted. But at the moment there is concern they are open to abuse. In the run-up to the 2016 election of Donald Trump, political consultancy firm Cambridge Analytica got access to information on 50 million American Facebook users and helped to target them with political ads. Facebook has tightened its rules since then, but still won't reveal how its algorithms work. And until last year, users in the UK didn't always know who was paying for the ads they saw on Facebook. But the rules have now been changed. Still, some experts feel many of the current laws created for an analogue age are not fit for today's digital world.
Time to get talking with me today at the round table. We have Zeynep Engin, who researches digital ethics at University College in London. Danny Meadows-Klue is here too, Chief Exec at Digital Strategy Consulting. Dr. Athina Karatzogianni is Associate Professor of Media and Communications at the University of Leicester. And in Oxford, we welcome Stacie Walsh, an expert on digital policy at Oxford Information Labs. We will come to you three around the table in just a moment. But Stacie, let me bring you in first of all. You're in Oxford. You understand the way these things work. I'm not sure that I do specifically or our audience does. So what goes on here?
So people are taking data sets, and this could be a data set that's provided by the social media company, or they could be bringing in many different data sets offline. They are then finding interesting correlations between people's likes and dislikes and making very targeted advertising pools out of that. And that's why we're getting targeting and micro-targeting now.
If it comes to political campaigns, they're either selling their message or they're not selling their message. With these targeted ads, are they narrowing it down to things that would resonate with a particular person?
So they're definitely going for an emotional response. They want something that people will either very strongly agree with or very strongly disagree with. And it's not always about selling a belief or an idea, but it's actually about getting engagement, either donations, volunteer work, going to polls, or dissuading people from going to polls.
I think that this doesn't sound unethical. If you've got an advert and you want somebody to like it, presumably you do, you find out what they like and you make sure that they listen to your message that way. Where's the ethics in this?
These are the business models, certainly for social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. It works by the more attention you gain, the more ads you sell, the more targeted people you have, the more ads you sell. And as Zuckerberg famously said, we are selling ad senator. So this is how the whole thing works. The problem
is it unethical?
The problem when it
gets
when it gets unethical is that we do not have transparency in how these algorithms work for these platforms. First of all, also it got unethical because there were companies that were targeting specifically. Targeting individuals and collecting information from them that they were not aware they were giving. And that was the Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example.
Yeah.
And because we don't have transparency in how these algorithms work, and we're not allowed to know them. It is like the Coca-Cola recipe.
Well,
This
let
poses
me put it to you
problems.
this way. If I was walking down the street and I saw a poster at the side of the road and it was trying to sell me, let's say, some hair product, yeah? I wouldn't know where they got the information from, and that wouldn't worry me in the slightest. I'd either like it or I wouldn't like it. I'd either buy it or I wouldn't buy it. So why do we need to see how these things work? It's audience research, effectively, isn't it?
And the model, the analogy works up to a point, David, but I think what's different in this space is there are thousands and thousands of variations of that poster. All of us and most of your viewers would be seeing different posters. And in a world where, as you're walking along the high street, you think everyone's seeing the same stuff, suddenly you're in an environment where things are not so transparent. So when it comes to this micro-targeting of political advertising, remember, companies like Facebook have something like 50,000 data points on us. This is a level of insight that no form of media has had in the past. So the analogy only works up to a point. And I think this is where the misapprehension is. People assume that targeting is sort of by gender or by age or by demographic. And it's not right down to the precision of exactly what you liked, what you didn't like, what you shared with your friends over the past 3 years. So in that sense, I think we're genuinely in a very different place.
Surely that's just darn clever, isn't it, rather than unethical?
It's brilliantly clever. And the ethics come in, and I'm going to bow to some of my colleagues on this. The ethics come in when you have to question how transparent that is and how regulated and how much oversight there is. So if we go back a couple of years in the, for example, here in the UK during the Brexit campaign, one of the challenges was that none of the ads were properly regulated. So whereas every ad in all other media channels had to carry an imprint that said who was paying for it, in that campaign, anybody could pay for anything. So you ended up with an enormous amount of disinformation.
You could end up in a position with not even knowing it is an advert, thinking
Yes.
that it is it's something real, telling you the truth, rather than trying to sell you a point of view.
Basically, I will actually pick up on the transparency issue first. I
So
think
all three of you have mentioned transparency. We'll come back to you. I'm sure you've got something to say about that, Stacie, in just a moment. But yeah, sorry.
I think there are two aspects to the transparency issue. First is, yes, the algorithms are proprietary, so you don't have access, you are not allowed to see the algorithms and what they are doing. And the second thing is technology itself. So machine learning algorithms are not transparent by design. So you don't have access, you don't know actually how machine is coming to that sort of conclusion.
Let's be straight about this. An algorithm is an extremely clever computer program that tells the person who has helped to create it what they want to know to achieve a particular end, yes?
Well, yes, you define outcomes, you define input, but you have no idea about what is happening in between. So it is algorithms. When we talk about algorithms, obviously there are different types, but what is worrying is the artificial intelligence, machine learning, or so-called deep learning algorithms that are more...
See, I don't really get this transparency thing. You can come back in a minute, Danny. I don't really get it. If I buy a car, I don't need to know how it's made, how it works.
But
If I use a product like Facebook or whatever, I don't need to know how they came to know what they know about me, because it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I've given them clues. I've littered biscuit crumbs through the forest so they can follow a trail. Why the need?
I
for
might push back
transparency?
on that.
Yeah, go on, Stacie.
So I don't think it is very obvious what these social media companies know about us. So some of the information that they get is things that we post on their website and we post publicly. So we assume that they have that information. At the same time, they're mining our private conversations that we're having with friends and family. They know where we go, so our physical location, and a lot of other types of metadata that they've been collecting for years without being very open with users about it. So they're actually aggregating a lot of data that we don't understand that they have.
the issue is also, yes, the companies are doing this, but there is also the machine insight into the process. You don't know how the machine came to that sort of conclusion in the end, and it might be anything really to do with your even biometric information, your private information that you don't want to share. And if you well, we are seeing the political campaigns right now, but if we think about a future where machines are going to communicate to each other,
Yes.
then it will become even a bigger problem.
To make it more personal. So what if an algorithm, you're doing this job how many years now? 30 years?
Slightly more.
Okay, but suddenly AI agent is going to determine how good you are at your job. And suddenly the AI says, No, he's not good at this, based on some kind of black box scenario that you're not allowed to question. That is the answer. He's not doing this job well, based on these algorithms, these metrics, and so on, and you get fired. This has happened to a teacher in the US. Suddenly, after doing a job, he gets fired because the AI determines you're not a good teacher anymore. So how AI agents come to that decision is not transparent, and in terms of how they might be used in making decisions for medical. Who is going to get medical treatment? Who is going to get out on parole or like get out of So some of these decisions are going to be coming out of human hands and into these predictive algorithms. And this is where the problem starts, because it is hard to know how this algorithm reached that decision. You could do it, but it's very expensive to do it, to go back and look at this.
So shall we now talk about the political side of this and whether it's actually changing democratic processes and democratic values?
Yeah, well, I mean, our democracy is under threat if we don't get it right. We've got regulators that are predominantly analog regulators. We live now in a digital age. And in many countries, they're simply unfit for the task ahead. If you think about this conversation about algorithms, then in a Facebook scenario, you've got two sorts of algorithms running, one for the deep text, the content that we see, one for the advertising. And it's the content side as well, which is in a space where a lot of the content that may be being pushed to people from a political perspective may not be real. It may be part of that fake news propaganda space that's been kind of blown open publicly. I mean, and you've got Twitter closing 1 million accounts a day in terms of just the volume of fake accounts that were out there. Facebook closing billions of accounts. So in that sense, when all of us are ambling around social media, what we think we're seeing may not be in any way a reflection of the world around us.
Give us an example, any one of you, if you like, because this is a conversation, it's not just for me to ask questions. Give us an example of where in an election you know that material differences have been made by the use of targeted political advertising. Can you?
That's actually the problem itself. That's one of the major problems itself. It's very hard to detect those sort of personalized ads and try to understand the social implications and social impact of it. So you don't have a way to understand what those ads are doing to citizen behavior overall.
Yeah, so you can't show me the evidence, but you think that's what's going on.
No, we know we have the results and implications, the outcomes from the advertising, the general advertising. We see how effective they are, and in those sort of scenarios, it's okay because if it's marketing and advertising, that's fine. But this
Come
is
back
democracy.
to you in just a moment, if I may, but I want to bring Stacie and Athina back in here. Can you think of specific examples where you can say without a shadow of a doubt that the end result has been materially affected by the use of targeted political advertising? I'll come to you in a minute, Athina, but Stacie's...
So I think that the problem with the question is that you want a definitive end result.
Yeah,
again,
I'm wondering if what we're thinking
going
at the
on.
moment is just a supposition or whether it can be proven.
Well, we have evidence that there has been tampering in elections by foreign bodies. So, for instance, Russian trolls working in the US elections. We have evidence of that. Now, being able to say what the exact impact and outcome of that is a very difficult task that I don't think anyone can do at this time.
Okay, so we can't prove it, can we, Athina?
Well, you can also not readily prove many things, but we still believe in them, you know, in the sense, so how to put it, I mean, there are things we cannot see, but we know scientifically that they're there. Now, here is the example of the American elections 2016, okay, and this is an election that we know that they had leaks, and leaks, and then WikiLeaks, we had the DNC leaks. We also later on had the CIA
Democratic
leaks.
National Convention.
Yeah.
Democratic Party.
Yes, we had Facebook making money out of Russian fake accounts. We know there was a whole investigation in the Senate in April 2018 where Zuckerberg was asked...
We know it happened. We know that people tried to do something
Yes.
for their own ends. But do we know, can we say definitively that it changed anything?
Well, I'll tell you something. If you have platforms like Twitter and Facebook defining how events with their own algorithmic governance, defining how things spread, including mainstream media like TRT we are now, okay? If they're defining part of how news is mediated and how people are targeted, if you define part of that, how could you not say that the influence is reality? If these platforms and how they're structured and how they operate and the business models and how they're exploited, okay, they're bending somehow news spreads, what is popular, what goes viral. Okay, why would you should prove to me that they're not influencing reality?
Let's say you've got somebody on a balcony with a loudspeaker.
Would you ask if television influenced reality?
If you've got somebody with a loud hailer on a balcony and there's a crowd of 50,000 down there listening, you know that they can hear him, but you don't know that they're going to take on board and be influenced by what this person has said. And I'm thinking it's becoming sort of the chattering classes type of thing where we think, yes, of course it has to be true. We can't see it, but it has to be true.
Not at all. The Department of Culture, Media and Sports investigation
That's in
here
the
in the UK,
yeah.
The UK regulatory framework, when it started to look at the whole issue of fake news, found really clear evidence that on an individual level, people were massively targeted, and targeted with very large volumes of content that they were re-exposed to time and time again. Damian Collins, the chair of DCMS, was saying that in his view, democracy was at risk from malicious and relentless targeting of citizens using dark adverts on social media.
How would you know if you were being targeted? That's the next question.
This is one of the biggest challenges, that in the past you wouldn't. Because until very recently here in our country, there was no regulation that forced the advertiser to even disclose who they were. And still on the content side, there's no regulation that forces people to disclose who they are. So in that sense, and we've got probably one of the most sophisticated regulatory frameworks for election law and for marketing anywhere in the world. That's only just starting to improve here in the UK. So I think for most countries, people have no transparency of whether they're being targeted and manipulated or whether what they're genuinely seeing is from other real people.
Wow.
And a very natural conversation.
If I wanted to look at what was coming my way and avoid stuff like this, is there any way of doing it?
The issue is basically there are entire fields that look into behavior manipulation of people through those sort of digital content. So like in the social media case or online gaming or shopping websites, they all exploit rules of psychology to make you to manipulate your behavior.
The honey trap.
And they
Putting
basically yes. And
Nudging.
you don't notice that.
Nudging.
Nudging.
More like barging, isn't it? Big shove in the middle of the bag. But is there any way I can spot it?
Well, if you are, it depends on your awareness level, I guess, first of all, but it's also a very sophisticated thing to do as well, because there are really sophisticated people behind the algorithms doing that, and the machines are already very sophisticated as well.
The vast
So it may be
majority
very
of people are
difficult
not
for
that
you.
sophisticated or not that inclined necessarily to look over their shoulder with every single thing they do. So it's hard, isn't it?
It's to do with the literacy of these things as well. Well, I'm a data scientist, and I sort of have an idea about how these things work, but it's not easy for
But they
masses
still catch
to.
you out?
I'm sure they do. I'm sure I do have my addictions to certain websites as well, I guess.
So where does this leave us now? Do we need?
Can I just build on Zeynep's point?
Of course.
It is impossible to spot this stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, at the very extremes, you can see it, but for the 99.9% of other content, there's no way to be able to spot it when you're in the middle of that on social media. That's one of the challenges in all this. The only real way of seeing a clean view of social media is to then look through somebody else's account and see the sorts of things that they're seeing.
Because you can't hold them up side by side unless you do that.
If you've got two laptops next to each other, you can start to get a sense as to what's different. In a world where there are millions of pages of content, billions of fake accounts, and tens of thousands of data points on each of us, the challenge, I mean, why we're here is that this is such an incredibly complicated area and it's so untransparent.
Is this algorithm spewing out, and when it's a personalised advert, something that, like 1,000 words a second for 100 million people, that are different in every single case?
Yeah.
So I think if you're talking about politics, of how people during election might be targeted, so who you want to target before an election is the people that are not decided. Yes, this is who you're going after. So you have to determine who these people are and target them a specific product of what you want to do with that. For example, if it wasn't important and it had no effect, why would people create in the Vote Leave campaign, after there is the £7 million threshold, they spend another, I think, 625,000, something like that, on the Be Leave campaign, which was the younger people, and they hired a couple of young people to do that campaign that didn't even know what was going on, and they were fined because of how the Be Leave campaign operated. So and the connections they had with Cambridge Analytica and so on. So if it wasn't important, why is it then that these data analytics are used to target people?
So it's clearly big ammo as far as they're concerned. Stacie, you look like you're itching to come in and say something.
Oh, yes, I could say a lot. I think that when we talk about identifying the content, that's a very difficult thing, as we've said. And one thing that we've noticed through our research is that the algorithms are rewarding conflict. So content that brings out a strong emotion is likely to be or more likely to be some of this misinformation or disinformation than content that is fairly neutral or somewhere along a common ground. But that to be said, somebody can write a very emotional post and it is legitimate content. So that's the difficulty. The problem is the algorithms now rewarding engagement, which makes it difficult to track and makes, at the same time, the content spread wider.
Are we moving towards a position where, in terms of elections, regulation, and I can only talk about this country because election laws are different in pretty much every nationality, in every nation. Are we moving towards a point in this country where there will be the same sort of restrictions on this type of advertising that there is on, let's say, election spending, what you can say after a certain time on voting day, on polling day?
Yeah, we are and we must.
Definitely.
We must move there faster. And I think there's a warning for, in a way, you can use the UK Brexit vote and you can use some of Trump all the way back to the primaries as a warning for what happens if the regulations are not effective. Because if you can't see who's advertising to you, and if most of the ads look like they're just friends and local community groups pushing an agenda, and it sort of feels like the whole world is moving in that direction, but actually it's a propaganda message that you're just being completely immersed by.
But if it's like sprinkling hundreds and thousands, those tiny little things you get on the top of fairy cakes sometimes, if there's that much of it around, how are you possibly ever going to be able to either spot it or regulate it?
Well, I mean, first of all, the platforms themselves can ensure that any political advertising is declared at the point where it's uploaded. And so that way you get a message, just as you would in any other media channel, that says this is paid for by this particular
Or brought
party.
to you by friends of.
And that's now coming in the UK, but I think there's a regulatory learning for all other countries to bring in that framework extremely fast. But you've got to go further, because it's not just about the paid advertising, it's about all this kind of propaganda, fake news stuff that's just appeared over the last 4 or 5 years. And this is where the platforms themselves, mainly Facebook and to a small extent Twitter, have just got to step up and police all the stuff that's going in. They've got to have some awareness
Which they've
about
sort
what's
of
real
said
and what's not.
today that they're going to do, with Nick Clegg's announcement that they're going to have an independent oversight committee or whatever.
Yeah, finally we're getting some traction from Facebook, and I think that's to be received. But this isn't something that the platforms themselves should be doing in isolation. This needs to have government involvement, so it is through the due democratic process, and not what one particular power technology company wants.
Aren't there more important things to worry about and spend money on, like war, famine, inequality?
This is democracy, and also if you think about the fact that you had the scandal, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, and then Facebook gained 5 million more users. So it doesn't look like it's affecting them.
I was thinking, actually, if you're going to talk about democracy and algorithms, then we have a huge issue internationally to look at. Basically, well, if we call it Asia-West chasm type of thing, then what we have got is two very different approaches to government-citizen relationships, and two different types of regulation into these sort of systems as well.
It's got to be Stacie, it's got to be a pretty big punishment, hasn't it? Here, I remember reporting probably 15, maybe more years ago, on antitrust cases that were brought against Microsoft and others. And the size of the fine, the size of the punishment was so small, it really didn't encourage them not to transgress. They might just as well carry on doing what they're doing. So you've got to get pretty draconian here.
Yeah, I do think that the fact that these are such multifaceted companies, they are monopolies in a lot of ways, it's definitely something that we need to take into account. And part of that goes back to the business model that they're running under. And I completely agree with Danny that we do need greater transparency, but we need transparency, and what we can use is we can use those business models to get information from the social media companies. At the same time, we need to take into consideration the campaigners, the legitimate political parties that are taking advantage of what these platforms are offering, and think about how electoral commissions can have a better relationship with them and get information from them as well.
Okay. Transparency, you came up with it there. Transparency, transparency, transparency. That is obviously what matters more than anything. Would you believe it? Well, I suppose it's really what you're talking about. Would you believe it? We have come to the end of our time here on Roundtable. It is fascinating as ever to get the views of the experts on this. Thank you so much. A couple of old friends, a couple of new people, and we hope to have you back on another occasion. And thank you very much indeed for watching. I'm David Foster. This has been Roundtable. Hope to have your company next time. Goodbye for now.